So I'll talk a bit about the news a few minutes here while we're waiting for people to show up. This one I thought was pretty good. So TeamViewer stores passwords unencrypted in RAM, and it stores them in the registry encrypted with AES with a static key, which he was able to find by scraping RAM. It's a good, interesting article explaining how he used various tools to investigate the RAM, and he eventually found the key. So that's already been patched, but that's a very common error. I've been talking for years at DEF CON and all the other conferences about how many apps do the same thing on mobile devices. And there's a new cybersecurity certification that the Department of Defense is going to require from contractors, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So we'll see what comes of this. Compliance is an ever-growing thing. And here's something called MemHunter, which will supposedly scan live memory on endpoints and detect a resident malware and detect when it's injecting commands into memory. So that sounds like a good tool to check out and see how it works. Something to add to the older thing, volatility was the previous way to do this, but this is some kind of live memory scanner to detect resident attacks in memory. So the cloud is incredibly huge. Most companies' profits are resting entirely on cloud services. I know Microsoft is. AWS is huge. Microsoft is number 2, and Google Cloud is way down at number 3. So they're talking about all the plans. A lot of people have multiple clouds where they use many of these, and there are a lot of people who sell multi-cloud solutions. So here's the revenue in billions, just showing, you know, the field growing bigger and bigger, very fast. Everybody's finding out that you want to be in the cloud, and they have the details of the advantages of each of the main offerings here. So this is very important. I know we now have at least one cloud class here, and we're going to have a cloud certificate, and that is definitely where you want to go, which is why I've very much moved all my classes away from virtual machines and onto cloud-based machines, because cloud-based machines are far more important. So the Jeff Bezos claims he was hacked by the Prince of Saudi Arabia, and the evidence for that is highly unconvincing. However, the spyware that he supposedly used is real stuff, and this is the NSO group that sells spyware to governments, and there are huge arguments that the governments then used it to do unethical things. But anyway, they're now investigating the NSO group to see if they are facilitating foreigners spying on Americans or something of that nature, which they probably are, in that they're selling basically weapons, and the governments they sell them to do whatever they want with them. So we'll see how that works out. So Java and C++ are programming languages that will pay you a lot for developers. I always heard Java very high here. Java is very hard to develop in, but if you learn the skill, people will pay you money for it. So it's a well-known fact. They claim in Thailand they have found a drug that helps with coronavirus. They just use a bunch of flu and HIV drugs, and they claim that people recover quickly from coronavirus, given all that. So that might be true. Just sort of like shooting it with whatever weapons you have at hand. But up till now, there's no hope at all of a vaccine. They say the vaccine is going to not come out for like months. So a treatment would be good. And there are two cases in San Francisco being treated. So coronavirus is here, although hopefully not spreading too much. San Francisco politics is famous worldwide for being fantastically corrupt. Certainly everything I can see in the administration here and the administration above it is just fabulously corrupt. And various people are trying to bring it up. In particular, one thing I've heard for years is that if you want to build a building, you just have to bribe everybody. They inspect you, they delay you. It's the classic nonsense. They say it takes 4 years to get approval to build anything in San Francisco, and that permits tons of delays and corruption, and you basically have to bribe a bunch of people to get anything done. This has been, I think, an open secret for years. As it hits the press, maybe something will be done about it. I see a chat message. Am I on the staff Wi-Fi? My connection is unstable. Thanks for telling me. I'm on danger zone. Let me try the guest. Good, thank you for telling me. Okay, let's see if the guest network works better. Usually it's the one that works best. Good, let me know. I appreciate the feedback. All right, and so red teams, I always wondered how people could have red teams at companies. And in fact, as you can imagine, there's conflict over this. The red, especially when they do things like social engineering and lie to people and make fake accounts and such, much better. Good, thanks for telling me. And so they've asked red teamers, and they all say, oh, it's perfectly fine to lie to people and trick them. And most of the rest of the people in the company are not really happy with that. And so this is a natural tension. I mean, the red teams want to get into everything, and the other people say you should have some ethical limits. And, you know, people aren't really on the same page here. There's no simple answer. People need to develop better rules of engagement. Anyway, so I think we're close enough to the official time. I might as well get going. I wanted to add something here that just came out in the news this week that I thought was very important for this class. And that is here. I've been wanting to teach ransomware protection for years, but I don't know what to tell people. And the government just came out with an official recommendation for how to protect yourself from ransomware, which is what I wanted, some kind of clue what to do. This is the NEST Special Publication 1800 from the US government on data integrity. This is a draft, but it's like the third or fourth draft, and they're beginning to be very clear here. So I think when I teach incident response again, which I think will be next semester, I'm going to try putting homework to match this document. So they have a plan here. Is what you have to have. You have to identify your cybersecurity risk, protect your services, detect violations of security, respond to the incidents you detect, and then have a recovery process after you have had a security incident. And here's the specific technology. Symantec makes products. Cisco, Glasswall, Tripwire, Micro Focus, and Semperis make the products that they want you to use. They have specific products they recommend to protect an enterprise from ransomware, and a specific process. You protect yourself with integrity checking mechanisms. Then you detect anomalies with things that are scanning your network and looking for the change of critical files. And then you decide when something is an incident, and you have alerts. Then you have continuous monitoring down here to detect bad behavior from your people and malicious code and other kinds of unauthorized activity. And then you have an incident response plan to deal with it. And then a communications to tell everybody what they need to know during the incident, analysis to figure out what happened, mitigation to fix the problem, and then other components. Here's the particular components. Tripwire is what I expected. That's why I think this is a good document. I expect Tripwire is the famous integrity monitoring solution. I don't know about Semperis, but apparently it's important too, and I'd like to see what I can do here. And you've got Cisco and Glasswall for event detection, and Semperis also for event detection. Then you have logging tools, forensic tools to analyze what happened, mitigation and containment, and then reporting tool, ArcSight. So these are very famous vendors, and that's the game. So you'll hear a lot more about this next semester if you take incident response, which I think is coming next semester. If not, it'll be the semester after. But I've been struggling with the projects in that class because incident response is a very new field and the tools are not really established yet. And this, I think, goes a long way to helping to define what the standard tools will be. So, all right, so we're up to asset security here. And we're halfway through asset security, I think. Wait a minute, no, I think we're still finishing chapter 1, just a moment. We got the second half of chapter 1 is today, that's next week. Where's my, all right, just a moment while I find my slide playing program. Right, there it is, okay. There, that's what we need, chapter 1, and we're halfway through it. All right. And so that's about, here, I think 83, that's right, good. All right, so you have a security program life cycle. So you plan with risk assessments and so on, then you implement your security program, and then you operate your security program and perform audits and backups and other tasks that you have to do and considering your service level agreements. And then you have to monitor logs and events to decide if your security program is working. This is the fundamental point of all modern business cycles for any serious compliance framework like ISO 27000. You have to have a closed loop where you set your goals, you try to achieve the goals, you measure how well it's working, and then you improve your process in a closed loop to make it stay effective. So you plan, implement, maintain, and then you evaluate to see how well it worked, and then you change your plan. And if you're not constantly improving, then you will fall behind very quickly because technology keeps changing so fast. So this is continuously optimizing is the goal of all large security programs. And this is, so you have compliance, which is required to meet whatever the standards of your company are. And it depends on your industry sector. So if you handle credit cards, it's PCI DSS. If you handle medical data, it's HIPAA. And if you're a college, there's one called FERPA. If you are an investment company, then there's Sarbanes-Oxley. And for almost every business sector, there are some requirements to figure this out. So governance is your strategic planning. And then you have compliance to just comply with the law. And then you have risk assessments here, and a lot of data flowing in all these directions. And it ends up there were many layers of administration and many documents flying around in reports to prove all these things. So the laws vary in your company and with your business sectors. You have to have a team of lawyers at every company because everybody is constantly getting sued for this and that. And you have to be evaluating the legal risk of what you're doing. Privacy is huge these days, especially with the new privacy regulations in California and Europe, and probably rapidly spreading to every other state in the federal level. Americans are going to suddenly have to actually start paying attention to what they're doing with the personal data of their customers, which they have all been just completely using with total disregard until recently. But now they're all going to be very careful what they do with that and have to prove that they're compliant with the privacy regulations. And so far, most companies are still ignoring the California law, thinking it won't be enforced for a while. But anyway, so Facebook, of course, was the poster child for all this, egregiously letting everybody use their data, and now they are the one being primarily punished by the Democrats who are very mad at them. And they've been setting aside vast amounts of money for fines. We'll see what comes of all this. Anyway, so there's a lot of legal and regulatory issues. There's just crimes against your computer network, like denial of service attack and malware. Then there's all the crimes that use your computer as a tool to steal credit card numbers or harass people. In general, one fundamental issue here is it's very difficult to identify who has done a crime on a computer network. In principle, anybody could impersonate someone else by using a proxy in some other country and trying to use malware that you stole from another country so you appear to be something. So when they keep saying China did this and Russia did that and Iran did that, those are really not much more than guesses. You never could really be sure which country did what, because it would be very easy to impersonate a country. In the major legal systems, there's civil law, which is the most common, where you just argue about money, and the end result is somebody has to pay a settlement. It's typically what you do. And this is something where someone has to sue and complain. The police will not take independent action on a civil suit. There has to be a victim who goes to court and sues, demanding some money. Common law is the major legal system you see in the CISSP exam. This is USA, UK, and so on. And this is where it's case law. Things are determined by precedent, which is what you hear all the time. For example, the California privacy law is out, but most companies are not doing anything about it because there haven't been any cases yet. And only when there are a few cases of someone actually being punished for it, do they then really know what you can get away with. Because the law says something, but you can argue and it's not 100% clear whether you're breaking it. So it doesn't really have any teeth until you have some cases. And then you can compare what you're doing to the cases and decide whether you appear to be on the good side or the bad side of it. There's religious law in other countries. It's not big in America. And then there's customary law, which is closely related to best practices. This is what you do in America. This is why one thing I found when I started doing bank app security, most bank apps do not meet what I would perceive as any consistent security standard. What they do is they just do what the other banks are doing. And then they say, well, we're up to standard practice, because they figure they can avoid being accused of gross negligence by just saying, I'm up to the standards of my industry. And that is one argument you can make in court, that we're as good as the other guys and that should be good enough. And in the absence of defined security metrics and defined security standards, that tends to work in court. Then there's criminal law, of course. This is like crimes like murder, where even if there is no victim complaining, the police will prosecute and people often go to prison for it. Those are the very extreme crimes. Civil law is much more common. This is where you are just complaining about money, where you claim a product was advertised falsely or did not perform as required, or people misused your data and you want some money to pay you for it. One big issue is that the proof for criminal law must be beyond a reasonable doubt, but the proof for civil law must be the preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. But the only punishment is you have to pay money. You don't typically go to jail for violating civil law. So statutory damages are damages that come just because you broke the law, even if you did not exactly hurt anybody. Compensatory damages are returning money that someone lost because of your criminal activity, and punitive damages are fines imposed upon you to punish you, to make you an example to others, so you scare other people from doing the crime. Then there's administrative law, which is the kind we're going to hit a lot here. This is where there is some rule, like a privacy law that says you must do something, or PCI DSS that says you must be audited every year and other things, and then you can just see if you really did it or not. So there are all these regulations. If you are in a regulated industry, then there are certain things you have to do, just like paying your taxes, and if you don't, there are fines and punishments specified for failure to obey those laws. So liability is when you have done something and now you are taking a risk of being punished for it. So the prudent man rule is you should do what a prudent man would do, and if you don't, then you are guilty of negligence. And due care is doing prudent things, and due diligence is having a management that makes sure that people are doing due care. So intellectual property, you have trademarks, either unregistered or registered, which are marks identified with your product that you don't want other people using. You can patent things, and then you can demand money from anybody that uses that product. And you can copyright things. You do not need to register copyright anywhere for any creative work. All you have to do is be able to prove that you had it at a certain time. What people often do is mail a copy of it to themselves and then not open the envelope. And then they go to court with that envelope with a postmark to say, I had it on this date, so the person who published it on a later date stole it from me. That's considered good enough proof in general cases for things like art and such. Then there are end user license agreements. We know these all the time, where you have a product like a Mac computer or something, and you don't have the right to just do anything with it. There's an agreement that comes, and you can only do what you promise to do with it. Software has this. And then there's trade secrets, protected by non-disclosure agreements and non-compete agreements. California does not allow non-compete agreements, but only non-disclosure agreements. This is considered one reason why Silicon Valley is so very productive. You can totally work at, say, Cisco, which is in fact what happened. Cisco had engineers working for them who disagreed with Cisco's policy. In particular, they didn't like them using this really old, obsolete operating system called iOS that looks like MS-DOS. They wanted them to use Unix, and Cisco wouldn't do it, so they just left and formed their own company called Juniper and made Unix-based routers that are generally considered much better. And you can do that in California, but you could not do that in other states because you have to sign a non-compete agreement that says if you leave this company, you cannot work in the same field for a period of 5 years or something. But you can't do that in California. They do have non-disclosure agreements here, but they don't have non-compete agreements. So you could start a business and do something similar. You couldn't use directly the same stuff that the previous company owned, though, or that would be a violation of the non-disclosure. But in other places, you're basically held hostage. You can't even get another job in the same field. I don't know. I don't hear them in California, and if they did, I don't think they would hold up in California. Google makes people sign non-compete agreements?
They sue the people that don't move to other company.
Oh. Well, that would, I don't think they'd win in California just on the non-compete agreement, but they might have other arguments. And so the intellectual property attacks are the things that bind these. So software piracy is making unauthorized copies of things, corporate espionage is stealing secrets. And of course, there are these cyber squatting and cyber squatting, where you buy related domain names that are close to a real domain. And then you do things like put an email server and get company email, or send out spam and get people to go there. It's quite a job. So digital rights management is the control of this stuff. This is specified to some extent by the Digital Millennium and Copyright Act, and that is what gives penalties for this. And you can now have digital signatures and digital watermarks and so on, keeping track of who owns something and who made a copy of it. This is, of course, mostly the MPAA and the RIAA prosecuting people that copy movies and music. Then there are import-export restrictions, which I'm hitting more and more now that I'm doing international work. I went to China and they wanted to talk, and I said, I'll teach cryptography. And they said, you can't. There are export restrictions. You cannot export cryptography to China. And I looked it up, and that is absolutely true. They're on a special list because of their piracy of music and movies. They were punished by putting on an export list, so I can't teach my cryptography class there, even though my cryptography class is in no way classified military stuff. Still, you're not allowed to export any cryptography from America to China. So, and there are many other issues here. Idea, it is just open source tools. It's just ordinary stuff like RSA, but they said you would be in trouble in America when you came back. Technically, and I might be able.
regularly download outside.
Oh, yes, yes. But still, they said I might get in trouble when I came back. And I didn't ask my lawyer, and hey, I didn't push it. But I might have been okay. I might not have been. But there certainly was an issue. China's absolutely on the list where it's restricted. So I think realistically, I would have to apply for permission to do it and get approval or face some kind of punishment for doing it. So they said, don't do it. And I didn't. Instead, I taught exploit development, which is legal apparently, because not cryptography. Anyway, so here's the rules for export of cryptography. Here's the export rules, and here's the list of countries. D1 is the countries that have stricter export control, like China and Russia. And there's B and E. So anyway, all right. So B includes Saudi Arabia and Singapore. That's why I figured I'd be fine in those countries. They're on our friends list like Canada, but D is China and Russia, stricter rules. So data breaches are when your confidential data is exposed, and cybercrime is any crime carried out with computers. And the big issue law enforcement complains about is going dark, where there is an increasing amount of data, they say, in encrypted channels they can't get into, so they can't wiretap it and they can't get it with a court order, and they're very concerned about this information flowing that the government cannot see. The civil rights people and liberties people say that's wonderful, we should all have our privacy. The law enforcement people say this is terrible, nobody should be able to hide from a court order or search warrant, and the battle rages. So privacy is protected by government. The European has the strictest privacy laws. And there's another one here, which includes several countries, but the big ones I hear about are the GDPR in Europe and the California privacy law. Those are the new stricter ones that greatly regulate companies like Google and Facebook, and they tried to say it would be too expensive to comply with it because they have rules like you can actually ask them to erase your data, and you can ask them to tell you what data they have on you. And I've heard several people, including Urban, said if you don't ask Facebook what he has about them, they'll send you a huge file with everything they know about you. And they do know everything. So anyway, there used to be this thing called safe harbor. There's a big legal problem. In Europe, they're supposed to keep data private, but Europe doesn't have any free services like Gmail and Yahoo Mail and everything like they have in America. So everybody there wants to use American services. But in America, foreigners have no privacy protection at all. They can just be spied on. So it totally violates European law for European companies to use American services, but they really want to because they're cheaper. So they had a thing called the safe harbor, which was a sort of legal fiction where those companies would like promise to protect European data, which they totally can't do. And the Europeans would pretend that they had protected it. So it was temporarily an exception, and it was treated as legal for them to send their data over here. But because Snowden leaked all the secrets, they canceled safe harbor. The USA was considered too reckless and careless with information. So they put up something called Privacy Shield, which is more or less the same thing. Again, making it legal for European countries to use American services, even though that data is not protected over here as well as it should be, according to European law. So there's also a lot of international cooperation. I went to a Secret Service meeting a while ago, and they said they're in fact having a lot of success pursuing criminals into Russia and other nations and getting law enforcement there to help them to break down big cybercrime gangs. It used to be considered impossible, but now they're increasingly getting pretty good at cooperating for major criminal figures. All right, so here's some major laws. HIPAA we talk about a lot to protect health data. And then CFAA is the main one hackers get accused of. This is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So if you connect any computer on the internet and you do anything that exceeds your authorization, you have now broken the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And this is what most hacking researchers get prosecuted for. If you connect to a server, you find a vulnerability, you download some information, then they accuse you of breaking the CFAA. It's the most common law on which they prosecute those people. Although I had the head of the FBI here last semester talking about this, and he said of their cybercrime task force, and he said they really prosecute very few people under this at the federal level, only like 120 prosecutions a year in the whole country, and more than half of them get suspended sentences and serve no jail time. So it really is not the case that your average computer security researcher is at great risk. So you really have to do something pretty awful before they will actually throw you in jail for this. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act protected things from warrantless wiretapping, but that was greatly weakened by the Patriot Act in response to the 9/11 attacks. That pretty much gave the government free hand to invade privacy all they wanted to pursue terrorism investigations. And Graham Leach Bailey, I think it was Bliley, anyway, was passed in, and Sarbox was passed in response to the Enron scandal. These are financial regulations. So if you're on a bank or an investment company, there's a bunch of compliance rules here you have to follow to hopefully make it so you have to admit the truth about your finances and you're not fooling people into investing you and trusting you with their money when they shouldn't be. PCI we talked about, this is not a law. This is a industry self-regulation. The credit card companies have so far managed to lobby Congress successfully enough that there has been no law regulating the use of credit cards in America. Instead, they have industry self-regulation in this form, which is famously ineffective. As we know, there are tons and tons of credit card breaches. But it does require you to do certain things. It just doesn't seem to be very effective at actually protecting the data. And there are now breach notification laws in almost every state, so that if you do have a breach, you are required to notify the customers. This would seem to be a very good thing, and at least you'll know. All right. Then there's the general issue of professional ethics. If you get your ISC squared certification like CISSP, there are the 4 basic ideas. You're protecting society and infrastructure. You're not a rebel tearing down the government or corporations or anything. You're helping to hold them up. That's why you would get this certification. You have to act honorably and legally and provide diligent service. You have to give good service. You don't pretend to do things you can't do. You don't take people's money and then infect them with viruses to get more money out of them later and stuff like that. And you have to do some work to protect the profession, help other people on the way up, go to conferences and give talks, write informative blog posts, do something to help other people get into the industry, something beyond what you're paid for. You have to have a certain amount of pro bono work you do to maintain your certification. I was accused of unethical conduct, and if you get any accusations, even when you're just an associate of ISC squared, you must respond within 30 or 45 days or you lose your certification. A trollish character on the internet decided to accuse me falsely of crap, and I was teaching this class at that time, so I gave it to my students and we wrote a reply, and he accused me of this stuff, and eventually I was the unanimous recommendation was that they dismissed the complaint with prejudice. So I just had to write a good response and they let me off. This guy claimed that I'd done something I totally hadn't done, but if you don't reply, then you lose your certification. So that is, I think, not true of doctors. If you want to complain about a doctor, I think you have to actually be a patient of the doctor. Here, anybody, anywhere can complain, and you have to respond. So a person could, in principle, harass you. And that only happened to me once, but it could keep happening. Anyway, but that's the idea. That's why people really want you to have this cert, because it supposedly means they can trust you, and you would actually lose your certification if you were doing too many unethical things. Anyway, so I got some cahoots about that. In practice, it seems to mostly be an irritation to people, not really that good things are enforced. 1E, well, that's revolting. CNIT 125, where is my 1E? Let me try here. Oh, let's try favorites. There it is, good, okay. This looks right, okay. All right, let me get some place to put the answers.